Today we begin by reading from the 14th chapter of the book of Exodus, beginning with the 5th verse. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the minds of Pharaoh and his officials were changed toward the people, and they said, "What have we done, letting Israel leave our service?" So he had his chariot made ready and took his army with him. He took 600 picked chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers over all of them. The Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the Israelites who were going out boldly. The Egyptians pursued them, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots, his chariot drivers and his army. They overtook them, camped by the sea, by Phil-Harioth, in front of Baal-Zephon. As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites looked back, and there were the Egyptians advancing on them. In great fear, the Israelites cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us, bringing us up out of Egypt? Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt? Let us alone and let us serve the Egyptians. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." But Moses said to the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm and see the deliverance that the Lord will accomplish for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to keep still." And now, turning over into the book of Hebrews, the 13th chapter, verses 1 through 8, and then 15 through 16. Let mutual love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that some have entertained angels without knowing it. Remember those who were in prison as though you were in prison with them, those who were being tortured as though you yourselves were being tortured. Let marriage be held in honor by all, and let the marriage bed be kept undefiled, for God will judge fornicators and adulterers. Keep your lives free from the love of money, and be content with what you have. For he has said, "I will never leave you or forsake you." So we can say with confidence, "The Lord is my helper. I will not be afraid. What can anyone do to me?" Remember your leaders, those who spoke the word of God to you. Consider the outcome of their way of life and imitate their faith. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and tomorrow. And then skipping down to verses 15 and 16. Through him, then, let us continually offer a sacrifice of praise to God. That is the fruit of the lips that confess his name. Do not neglect to do good and to share what you have, for such sacrifices are pleasing to God. This is the word of God for God's people this day. Don't you love those Israelites? Sometimes we tend to put people in the Bible on pedestals, and it's not really helpful to us in our journey. And so sometimes it's kind of nice to just look at the real truth of characters in the Bible. And so today I just love the Israelites. So we see what they did. They left Egypt. Moses had spoken to Pharaoh and had secured their freedom, and they followed him. And they initially at least had hope for a better life. But all of a sudden they're looking back over their shoulder, and they realize that the Egyptians are now in hot pursuit of them. And so what do? What do they say to Moses? Look at the words there. They say, "Is it because there were no graves in Egypt that you bring us out here in the wilderness?" And, underscoring the next part is, surely we are out here in the wilderness to die. And then we look a little further. We notice that they have gone a little further on in their journey. They've been in the wilderness now for a short time, and they have not found water to drink. Certainly a cause to complain a little bit more. Finally, they find some water, but the water does not meet their taste requirements. When they taste the water, it's a little bitter. It's not exactly what they would have desired. So what do? They form a think tank. They do problem solving in small groups to try to decide, what's the best course of action. No, of course not. They do what they are best at. They complain. In a short time, food is in short supply. Anytime that our stomachs are not full to overflowing, we begin to panic, right? And so it was with the Egyptians. Fear begins to grip them. Despite their history with God, despite being a people for whom God had always provided, they begin to let fear overtake them. And what is the course of action that, of course, a people does in that situation? Complain. If only, they say to Moses, if only we had died in Egypt. At least there in Egypt we had bread. Now, remember, just a short time prior to this, they were so unhappy. They were grieving their current situations. They did not like living in slavery, and who would? But now that freedom is a little more of a reality, but food is in short supply, they are complaining. So what does God do? Sometimes I wonder why God doesn't just wipe us all off the face of the earth. And I wonder sometimes in these ungrateful encounters with His people why He doesn't just say, enough, and just say the end of you. But what does God do? Certainly not that. Instead, when we read that Old Testament story, we find this wonderful encounter of how God rains down bread from heaven. What do we call it? Manna. Manna is there for them in the morning, and all they have to do is to go out and gather up manna, enough for that day's food. The next chapter, they need water again. What do? Complain. Give us water, we're going to die out here in the wilderness. After those chapters take place, then the book of Exodus goes a different direction. Of course, we remember that this is the story of God's giving to Moses the laws that the people are to live by, so it goes in that direction for a long time. But then we flip over into the book of Numbers, and we find Israel up to her favorite way of acting in the world. We find her saying to Moses, we are sick and tired of this manna. Manna in the morning, manna at noon, and manna in the evening. Surely we can have something besides manna. They remember once again where? They remember back in Egypt. They remember back in Egypt that they, despite the fact that they were living in slavery, they remembered that they had fish sometimes to eat, that they had melons from the field. And so they say to God, can you just give us something else? Despite all that they had been given, despite the fact that they were never hungry, despite the fact that God was taking them on a daily journey toward freedom, the people of Israel complained. They fancied it into something that was just a fine art. The glass, is it half empty or half full? The world, our lives, our relationships, our church, is it full of problems? Do we wake up in the morning lamenting and regretting all that's wrong in every aspect of our lives? Or do we see the day as full of opportunities? Opportunities opportunities that with God's help can be exactly what God wants our lives and our relationships and our world and our church to be. We have to think about life. Is it reason to complain about what isn't good or what isn't perfect? Or is it a reason to be grateful for what is good, for ways that God has provided, for ways that we have been blessed by others around us? The passage from Hebrews encourages us into a certain pattern for life, for a life in which life is seen at least as half full or maybe overflowing. This passage commands us into attitudes of gratitude for what is good in our lives. It demands out of us a sense of gratitude for God, for what God has given. And it encourages us into patterns of living out of sacrificial praise. Did you hear those words? Sacrificial praise. Tom just played the song, a beautiful, beautiful rendition of that song. We bring the sacrifice of praise.